Hi everyone, and welcome back to Coach TV. Took a little break from posting videos. I was actually able to travel out to San Diego for a few days to take part in the USATF Emerging Elite Coaching Clinic for Endurance. It was an amazing couple days. Got to learn from some amazing instructors as well as some colleague coaches, and so kind of going through those things in my mind before I'm really ready to put those into place for my own athletes and maybe for some videos down the road. For right now, we're going to take a look in this video at some aerobic workout recovery timetables. So aerobic workouts are obviously the most important ones when dealing with distance and middle distance athletes. More than 50% of the energy is going to come from that system. So we really want to know when and where you can sequence these things together. So in this video, we're going to talk about the different workouts, how much time it takes to recover from each, and how you can sequence these things together. Because even more important than any one individual workout is how you're sequencing these things together so your kids can have proper adaptation. I'm Kyle Giacono. I'm the head boys cross country and track coach at Wharton High School in Tampa, Florida, and I have been for the last 6 years. If you want to take a look at my credentials, they're on the screen. So recovery allows for adaptation. So don't think of training just as your time on the track or the trails, either yourself or with your kids. You need to think as training as a triangle, with training being one aspect of it, as well as nutrition as another point, and rest, including sleep or recovery, as that third part. If any part of this triangle is off, the whole thing is going to fall over. Not enough adaptation or recovery, and the training is going to fall off. Improper nutrition, and the training is going to fall off. So all of these things need to be in balance in order to have correct adaptation. Aerobic workouts have very different intensities, from very, very easy type paces to much more high intensity, as well as a high amount of volume. And because of this, they require very different recovery timetables. Some require as much, if not more, recovery as high intensity anaerobic work. And others actually help speed up the recovery process, and we'll talk about that in a few slides. And more important than any one workout is how these are sequenced together, as I just mentioned. And recovery is probably the most underplayed part of training. Most people really kind of get into the idea of what I'm doing that day, and you really need to think about the fact that you're not really improving in any one workout. It's the recovery between them that allows you to get stronger because of what you gave as the training stimulus. So if we were to think about our energy continuum, the circle points here is basically the fastest aerobic paces. Anything to the right of those circles, from the VO2 max, 102%, 70%, 80% best effort, and aerobic power, anything from that area to the right is what we're dealing with aerobic workouts, with one exception that I'll talk about when we get to it. Anything left of this is anaerobically based, and we're not going to really deal with that. I'll post a video in the future when we get to that part of the training scheme. But right now, we're in late June, early July. Most people are dealing with aerobic workouts for their cross-country season. So why training requires any type of recovery? Training is simply tricking your body into thinking that you need something more of what it needs to survive. So if you were to just sit on the couch all day, your body would adapt to that training stimulus. But if it thinks that you need to run 50 miles a week, 60 miles, whatever it is your mileage is, it's going to create body structures because it thinks it needs that to survive. It doesn't know that you're doing it just for training purposes. It thinks that I need to run a long run at 10, 11, 12 miles once a week. I better have some aerobic adaptations to make this happen. I'm doing some high intensity VO2 max aerobic power intervals, so I'd better have some structures to extract more oxygen out of the blood, or whatever it is that you're ending up doing. It's going to adapt to what you're doing, and you need to basically trick it into thinking you need more than what you would just need for normal survival. Adaptations happen at the tissue level. No smaller, no bigger. So it's not at the organ level and it's not at the cell level. It's at the tissue level where your body adapts. Correct training stimulus causes the body to repair damaged cells individually within the tissue so that they come back better and stronger, so you can withstand the training load, thus making that tissue stronger. Then as tissues within organs get stronger, that organ itself gets stronger, and then as organs within a system get stronger, the actual organ system gets stronger, and then altogether the organism itself gets stronger. So don't think about training your kid or training your heart or training your lungs or any of those things. You're training individual tissues within those larger structures or the organism itself. So here's a way you could kind of imagine it to yourself. So imagine your body has two brick layers in general, and this is how adaptation is going to occur. You've got one that's working in front of the other. The first one is going to be designed to tear down old bricks, or these older cells within the tissue that are not strong enough to withstand the training load. The second one is working behind the first brick layer and putting down stronger bricks, making stronger tissues, if you can think about it like that. So if you don't give a strong enough training stimulus, the first brick layer has nothing to do. You're not working hard enough to damage and force it to repair any of these cells to make a stronger tissue. So the second also isn't going to do anything because the first brick layer didn't tear anything apart. The second one can't build anything back any stronger. But if you give too much to do, the first brick layer works way too quickly. It sees all the damaged cells that it's got to just rip apart, and the second one just cannot keep up. This is what leads to overtraining and chronic fatigue and really bad things if you're going overboard. Typically speaking, this is where most people kind of fall in. They want to do too much. They're not giving themselves enough recovery, or they're doing too much early. This isn't typically where a lot of people fall in. We're usually doing enough work. We're probably in this area where we're having this first brick layer just going crazy because there's so much damage, and we're not giving enough time for the second brick layer to kind of keep things in check. But if we put it in balance, if we have the correct training load stimulus, and we give, we're talking about in this video, recovery timetable that's appropriate, the two brick layers create a better, stronger athlete by creating these stronger tissues. Correct balance is this training ratio, is what it's referred to. The balance of these two is training ratio, and you may hear me refer to it as that. So training ratio is that correct balance of the training stimulus and the recovery. So, aerobic workouts recovery timetables. So, this is all based on generalities. You're going to have some differences based on different athletes, different fiber types, and that's going to just come with some different things with working with your kids and knowing what they actually need to actually get their adaptations in terms of a training stimulus. And some on these you might see 24 hours, and a kid might need a little bit more just because of their particularity. So make sure you're keeping notes, seeing how they are responding to these different things, but these are the generalities that you're going to want to look with. So first we're going to look at 24-hour recoveries. These are the ones where you can fit in anywhere. You can do one of these after anything that comes before it, and you can pretty much do anything the day after one of these, with one exception that we'll get to. So the long run at 65 to 70% of current date pace VVO2 max, your more experienced kids are going to be at 70%, and your newer kids are going to be at 65%. As long as this is at 20% of your weekly volume, 20% of your weekly volume in one shot, it's a 24-hour recovery. Even though it is a lot of volume, it's not really high intensity. Recovery runs, obviously, same thing. Your stronger, more experienced kids are going to be at 70%. Your less experienced kids are going to be at 65%. This is typically between 30 and 60 minutes, depending on your overall volume for your week. You can do this after or before any workout. Now, these two workouts, because they are so low intensity, actually can help speed up the recovery process. I like putting a long run the day after a race, or a recovery run the day after something that's really, really hard training, so that I can get my kids back sooner. The reason for that is these two workout types, because of their low intensity, actually help flush waste products out of your system. The waste products of your anaerobic system, the acid, gets used up by your recovery and long run paces. The aerobic system uses that as its own fuel source, and actually the increase in your heart rate can also help increase blood flow, and that actually helps with your actual recovery process. Now, just be careful. Remember, you can't go and when I say your lesser kids, 65%, these are your kids that have been in your program for a year or two. This may be a kid that's actually one of your higher level kids that could eventually progress to 70%, but these are your novices. 70% for your more experienced kids, you've had them for 3-4 years, or they came in with a high training age. The danger would be for you to go too long on your long run. You don't want your long run to be 25%. That would make it not 24 hours recovery. Or if your kids came back and they've run at 72, 75%, that might mean that they've just improved and they need a new VO2 max test, but just be careful that they're not trying to do more than this on these days. Short hill runs, this is actually an anaerobic run that you would do in the summer to try and keep a little bit of your force production. These are strength runs, and all of these workouts I have on here, I have video series on these if you look back in the channel itself, if you want a description on them. But short hill runs, you can do anything the day after, the day before. Short hill runs are great the day after a long run too, because it's completely different training stimulus, but you can do this after any workout or before any workout. And moderate tempos. Anything that's 85% of VVO2 max or shorter, as long as it's in that 20 to 25 minute range. So short continuous or fartleks where you're breaking it up, and moderate tempos, you can pretty much do anything the day after or the day before. So let's look at some harder workouts, 48-hour recovery. Long runs plus, this is what I was saying. If you take your long run and instead of going 20%, you've got 25% of your pace, then you've gotten to a point where you're going to be using too much of your fuel source, and you may need to give yourself 2 days to recover from it. That's why you would want to keep the long run right at 20%. Fast tempo, so anything that's at 86 to 92%, getting into that critical velocity or 10K pace, and you're going to start to develop more waste products, and you're going to need more time to recover. Long tempo runs, so even if it's at moderate tempo pace of 80 to 85%, if you're at 40 plus minutes, you're going to need more recovery because you're just using a lot of fuel source. And any aerobic power type workouts, 2-mile tests or intervals or repetitions at 98 to 101%, you need 2 days in between. These are high volume, high intensity. And your normal races, your mile, your 800, your 2-mile, and up to your 5K. These are normal races. These take 48 hours. So the way you want to think about this is anything in the 48-hour category, you have to put a 24-hour recovery workout the day after. So you could go a fast tempo run right here, and you could come back with a short hill run. Or you could do an aerobic power and come back with a recovery run. Or a normal race and come back with a long run. Anything from the right could follow up anything on the left. You probably wouldn't do a tempo run with a moderate tempo. That doesn't make a lot of sense, obviously, because you're doing the same thing. But in general, anything on the left follows anything on the right. You really wouldn't want to backdoor any of these things, back to back any of these things. Unless you have a kid with a very high training age, you might be able to get away with something like maybe you've got a kid that you've been working with for 4 years, they're really strong, maybe they came in with a high training age. You could stretch them by putting 2 of these together, maybe an aerobic power workout and a long tempo run, but you have to be very, very careful with doing that too often. Now, really high intensity and long workouts, 72-hour recovery. Anything in this category, and you're going to have to give them 2 24-hour recoveries. And obviously an off day would fit in with a 24-hour recovery too. So these would be aerobic power plus. So aerobic power workouts typically get out to about 6,000 meters, 6,400 if you do 4 times mile. If you go out to like 9,600 meters, you can do that, but they're going to be zapped for a long time. Not only the high intensity, the fuel sources are getting zapped. You're going to need to give them 72 hours of recovery. Very long races, so we're talking a 10K. Half marathon is lower intensity, but you might get into that case, a 15K, something like that. Very, very long races, and you're going to have to give him 2 24-hour recoveries the day after. And very long or very fast tempos. Maybe you're at 92% for 45 or 50 minutes. That actually wouldn't be possible because that would be 10K pace, and unless your 10K is really slow, it probably wouldn't be that long. But just the idea being is something that's just very, very high intensity tempo. You're just going to be sucking glycogen out of them. They're going to be using so much of the stored fuel source. You really need to make sure that you're giving them 2 easy days after that in some way, shape, or form, or 2 24-hour recovery days. Because these hill runs can be pretty high intensity, going 35 to 45 seconds as fast as you can up a hill. But because it's uphill, it's going to keep the intensity lower. So you can do maybe a very long race, like maybe a 10K, come back with a long run, and then do a short hill run, and you could get away with that, and that would work out really nicely too. So, some more about recovery needs, and this is our last slide. Central nervous system fatigue. What are the actual... This is really showing where the fatigue is with these different workouts. So central nervous system fatigue, so this is your brain and your spinal cord, the actual firing of your nerves This is from repetitive motion over time. This takes about 12 to 24 hours. This is the main nervous system fatigue in aerobic workouts, in your recovery and your long runs. You're really not getting tired when you're in shape from the actual distance. Your aerobic system can carry that load pretty easily. It's not about fuel source, because if you're at 65 to 70%, you're not burning a lot of glycogen. The days when you're done with this, and the reason why after a long run you might be a little uneasy on your feet, is there's just been so many times that your nerves are firing over and over and over. So the fatigue is central nervous system related. And again, 12 to 24 hours, and this is why if you have a high volume training, 65, 70 miles a week, if you're training for a 10K or a half marathon or a marathon, that 12 hours is why you can do 2 workouts like this in the same day. The idea being is you can recover, maybe you do an easy run in the morning and come back with a tempo run or something higher intensity in the afternoon, if it is in that aerobic threshold type training modality. So, when acid builds up in the muscles, okay, this is from anything done above 85% of your current date pace VVO2 max. So, 85%, that is your lactic threshold. At that point, your body is creating and clearing lactate in unison, and the idea being is anything above that, and there is going to be an accumulation of acid. Acid creates a lowering of the pH in your working muscles. Muscles like to be right at 7% or 7.0 neutrality on a pH scale. If you start getting into, anything below that, even hundredths of a point below that, and your body is not going to like it, your muscles start to shut down. That's why you start to feel really jelly-legged when you get a little bit of acid in your system. And 6.8 is pretty much enough to end a workout. It takes just very little to get your enzymes unable to work and your muscles unable to work properly. Say 12 to 24 hours, really the acid is probably itself cleared after about 20 to 30 minutes, but you're going to need to get some of that out of your system. This is why you could do moderate tempos and come back with it something a little bit harder the next day. Obviously, you want to be careful with that, because these are more intense than anything that's central nervous system related in terms of fatigue. Now, when glycogen stores are the issue, and this is something really you want to pay attention to, because glycogen stores are probably the most overlooked aspect of recovery. You can get away with stretching someone's glycogen stores for a while, but not long term. For the short term, you can. So glycogen is your body can store sugar or glucose, about 2 hours worth of it in terms of high intensity training. If you go and do something like aerobic power, your body is going to drop. Your body won't really allow you to drop below 20% total stores. So really you have less. This is why you've got the idea of the wall in a marathon being at 2 hours, because anything more than that and your body won't let you really use it. You're only using fat, and that's why the intensity drops. Glycogen is fast fuel. Anything that uses carbohydrate, your body can produce energy very quickly. So the idea being is, if you do anything above 70% VVO2 max, your body is going to need to have more time to recover, because your body can only use glycogen at that area. So if you go and you do an aerobic power type workout and you drop to like 25% stored glycogen, your body's used most of it. If you come back the next day, you're probably only going to have recovered about maybe 50-60% of that glycogen. The problem there is you try and do something like a tempo run or something really, really high intensity, and you're only going to get halfway through that workout before you hit that wall. You haven't given yourself enough time to recover. 24 to 72 hours you need to have to recover through this, and that big range is because of how much different work happens above that 70% VVO2 max. So if you do that same thing I mentioned, aerobic power, and you drop to 25% of your stored glycogen, you come back the next day and you do a long run, well, now you're only going to drop, say you're at 50-60%, you're only going to drop to maybe 40%, something like that. You're using as much fat as you are carbohydrate, and then the next day you bounce back up and you're at 80-90% and you can do something higher intensity. Now, to really get a big store of your glycogen, your body stores it in your working muscles as soon as you give it to it. So, and actually, it's really important to get carbohydrates in your system about 2 to 4 hours after a hard workout or a hard aerobic type race, because that's when your body is really trying to store the most of it. But also your body can store glycogen in your liver. It's like an extra store, and it only stores in your liver when you're in a deep sleep. So this also requires proper sleep as well as time if you're going to recover your glycogen stores. Now, muscle and other tissue damage, this is just from high intensity things, aerobic power, fast and hard tempos, long races. There's obviously going to be muscle and tissue damage and tissue damage like tendons and that kind of thing. This is from the training loads above your current ability. Again, a big area of 24 to 72 hours, depending on the damage and your training age, how you're going to respond from this. And last up is mental fatigue. This is from the demands of daily training and other athlete, anything that's happening, and it's very athlete dependent. So there's not a timetable on there because this is really hard to measure. You've got a kid that maybe has been in your training scheme for 3 or 4 years. They're going to be able to handle the mental fatigue much more so from all your workouts and your races. You have a kid that comes in first year, even if they're high level, you might have a kid that comes in and they're already a 9 minutes or under 10 minute 2 miler. Maybe they're a 17 or 16 minute 5K kid, but they haven't been in this type of training scheme for a while. They're going to have more mental fatigue than even maybe someone that's not as fast or as talented that's been in it for a while. So you're going to have a hard time really measuring this. It's really going to just take knowing your kid, and the more experienced kids, again, not the better kids, but the more experienced kids will be able to handle this much more so. So you're going to have to talk to them. You're going to have to see their body language. You're going to have to see how they run. They're going to have a normal gait, and you can pretty much probably pick out your kids just from the way they run. But if you can see something that's not there, maybe there's a mental fatigue that's kind of getting in there where they're just mentally not in it. You might want to consider maybe doing surveys or having some way to kind of quantify this. But there's really no way of measuring this in terms of timetables. You really just have to know your athlete to get this. So, I hope you enjoyed this video on the recovery timetables for aerobic type workouts. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments down below. If you like this video, maybe think about liking or subscribing. And until next time, this has been Coach